Hello and welcome to Craft with Sarah. In this video, we're not making a particular craft project. Instead, we're taking a deep dive look at a particular material, and that is craft foam, also known as fun foam or funky foam. I've got a little bit of an example here, but it comes in layers of different colours and different brands and types. This one is 2mm thick, which is just perfect for the Cricut. I've been using this in a few different projects recently, and I've had quite a few requests to do a deep dive video to show exactly how to cut it on a Cricut. The best thing is you don't need any speciality blades to cut fun foam, and you can do it with any type of Cricut machine, whether you've got one of the Explore models, the Maker models, the Joy Xtra, and even the Cricut Joy. If you do have the speciality blades of the deep point blade for the Explore or Maker models, or the knife blade for the Maker models, absolutely you can use those, and it does make it a little bit easier, as you'll see in this video. But if you've only got the normal blade that you use for everything else, cardstock and vinyl, the blade that comes with the Cricut, you can use that for fun foam, and I am going to show you how. Let's get started. Here are all of the different sections that are covered in this video. I've added the timestamps of when each section starts and the orange text at the beginning of each line. You can skip to that point in the video to just watch the sections you're interested in. For clickable links to go to all of the different sections, look at the YouTube video description. Within there, you can see the timestamps and they show as clickable links. Click that and it will skip you exactly to the point you want to watch. Before we go into looking at each individual type of Cricut machine and how to cut craft foam on that particular type, I wanted to do a little bit which will be the same for every single video. I wanted to do a little bit that will be the same for every kind of machine, and that is the test designs that we'll be cutting out to check the settings and to see what it needs for your particular machine, and also how we're going to add the craft foam onto the Cricut mat to give it the best chance of cutting through without anything moving about. Alright, so I've opened up Cricut Design Space and started a new project. And for all of the different types of machine that I'll be showing you, I'm going to cut the same thing because then we can compare how it cuts for each one. To keep things simple, I'm going to do some shapes. So we'll go into shapes and choose a star and a heart. Both of these are free to cut even if you don't have the Cricut Access subscription. So if you're following along and you want to test this out on your machine, you can use the same shapes if you want to, or you can cut whatever you want. Just bear in mind that for foam, you really do want easy, simple images with no thin lines or complicated bits. Okay, so I want to check a small cut and a big one. So for my star, I think I'll make it 1.25 inches tall, and the heart, let's go for 1.75. Ooh, 23,075 inches. I don't think that's going to work. 2.75. Does anyone else find it really hard? And actually I meant 1.75. Does anyone else find it really hard typing the size in since this latest Design Space update, where now you click and it gives you up to 4 decimal points? I find now typing in it, I get all random manner of numbers, even stuff I haven't actually typed on my keyboard. It's really tricky. Maybe it's just me though, so please do let me know if you're having the same thing. Okay, so I've got a 1.25 inch tall star and a 1.75 inch wide heart. And these shapes will be cut from foam for all of my different types of machine. Now let's take a look at how you'll put your foam sheets onto your Cricut mat. And although I'll show it with one of the 12x12 mats, it will work exactly the same if you're using the Joy or the Joy Xtra. What type of cutting mat do you need to cut craft foam with a Cricut? Well, the answer is it doesn't actually really matter. It's recommended that you use the strong grip mats, which are the purple ones, like this one. You see it says strong grip up here. But I've been trying out all the different mats, mostly because I don't actually have a strong grip mat on anything other than the 12x12 one. And I've been doing testing, and I've been using the standard grip mat for the Joy Xtra, works just fine, and the light grip mat on the Cricut Joy, because again, it's the only one I have, and it's worked fine. It hasn't moved the foam about, it has gone through the machine fine. So actually, it doesn't matter what kind of mat you use. The important bit is how you prep the foam to make sure it's not going to move around or come off, especially as it is quite a thick material. So I'll show you on my Cricut Joy Extra mat, but it's the same for all of them. So we'll peel off the protective layer. And I've got some little offcuts of my craft foam that I cut with some scissors. Remember, to start with, we're only testing the star and the heart, so we don't need a lot of foam. The important thing is to not line this up exactly on the corner of the grid like you normally would when adding material to your cutting mat. That's because we're going to need to use some tape to hold this in place. And if you put it right up in that corner, the tape will go over the edges and it will jam up and be horrible. So instead, I'm going to line this up where the 1 and the 1 inch meet. It doesn't have to be this far over, as long as it's far enough for your foam. And then push it down to get it really well stuck. If you have a brayer tool or even a rolling pin from the kitchen, go over it, push it down. We really want this to go on firmly. And now we're going to make super duper sure that it doesn't move by adding some tape around the edge. You can use painter's tape, masking tape, washi tape, although that might not quite be strong enough because some washi tape is very, very low tack, or even just normal sellotape, but that's probably the riskiest option as that's the most sticky and it can damage either your mat or the foam. I'm using masking tape. This is a really thick roll. I just had it in my random box of DIY stuff left over from painting the house a while back. It's going to work out just fine. That's a satisfying noise. Okay, now this is a bit thick. And the beauty of this tape is it will just tear. Not very neat. You could also cut it. I've done that really, really messily. And then I'm going to stick it so that it covers up all of the sides of my foam. And I'm going to cut it now because I did such a bad job at ripping it. It's typical that it's ripped really nice and neatly when I was testing, but as soon as the camera's rolling, it goes into a great big mess. That's always how it goes. Okay, I'm going to go down every single side, pushing my tape down really firmly. This will stop the foam from being able to move off of the mat, which can damage the cut, especially since for some of the machines, we're going to need the blade to go around lots and lots of times in order to cut through the thick material. So putting all that tape on, although it seems like it takes a long time, it's definitely worth it because if your craft foam moves as it's cutting, it means all of the repeated cuts won't be in exactly the same place. So you'll end up with messy edges on your cutout, whereas we want it all to be nice and smooth. So I've done this on the Joy Extra mat, but it will be the same for all of them. So if you're on the big Cricut Explore or Maker 12x12 mats, again, move it in. And on the Cricut Joy mat as well, move it in. It does mean it limits you a little bit on the Cricut Joy on the size you can cut because the mats are so small anyway. But what you could do if you were wanting to cut something that is 4.5 inches, the maximum, is you could just move it down to maybe the 1 inch line and just tape along the top and along the bottom, and hopefully that would be enough to hold it in place. All right, so now we know what we're cutting, we know how to load the mat. Now let's go into the machine specific instructions. For this part of the video, we're looking at cutting craft foam with the Explore and the Maker series of Cricut machine. So that's the Explore Air, Explore Air 2, Explore 3, Explore 4, Maker, Maker 3 or Maker 4. Now a little bit of a disclosure, I've never actually used the Explore Air or the Explore Air 2, the ones that have the dial on the right hand side. So it might be a little bit different if you've got one of those machines, but for any of the later models or any of the Maker models, you should be able to follow along exactly. All right, first things first, we want to move the white star wheels over to the edge of the machine so that they won't mark the craft foam. There's 4 of these inside the machine and you can just slide them along to the very edge. If you can't get to them, you can just move the blade carriage out the way. and then put those two to that side. So I've now moved them over. There are 3 types of blade that we can use with these machines. First up is the blade that it just comes with. So your regular fine point blade in there. That's what I'll go through first, and that will work for the Explore and the Maker series of machines, all the ones I just said. You can cut the craft foam with the original blade, but it's not always as straightforward as it might be with some of the other blades, and you might not find it goes all the way through, but I'll show you all of that shortly. Then we'll take a look at the deep point blade. This is the blade that comes in this black holder, and these work in all of the Explore series and the Maker series of machines. So what you would do if you had this one is you'd need slightly different cut settings, which we'll go through, but you would take out your regular blade, put that one in there and use that one. But we'll start with the original. And then third and finally for these machines, if you've got one of the Maker series, so that's the Maker, Maker 3 or Maker 4, then you could also use the knife blade. This doesn't work with any of the Explore models. This is the Explore 3, so I'll have to switch this out from Maker to show you this one. But the knife blade is kind of the strongest blade there is that goes the deepest. So it's great for craft foam. And we'll show that one after the regular blade and the deep point blade. All right, so I'm going to jump into Design Space. We'll look at the cut settings first of all that you'll need for any of the Explore or the Maker series to use the original blade that comes with the machine to cut your craft foam. We'll start off the cut by making sure the correct machine is selected. I'm using the Explore 3 and then press Make. You need to drag the shapes around because remember we've put it at this 1 by 1 inch, that's where the foam starts on our cutting mat. So we need to make sure that the shapes are going to fit onto where we've put the foam. And then press continue. Wait for your Cricut to connect. And then because for this first part, we're using the regular blade that comes in the machine, we need to make a custom cut setting for the foam. If you don't want to do that, the craft board setting does a fairly good job, that's craft with a K, at doing what we're about to do, but you will have to run it through the machine twice to get it to cut deep enough. So once it's done cutting, press the go button again without ejecting the mat. It will repeat the cut in the same place, and then that gives you pretty much what we're about to do in this video, but not quite as far through the foam. Okay, so if you don't have the deep point blade or the knife blade for your Explore or Maker series, then you can use the regular blade that comes in, but you'll need to make a custom cut setting. So to do that, click on Browse or Materials, and then at the very bottom, almost off the screen, it says Material Settings. Click that, scroll all the way to the bottom, it's long, and then press Add New Material. Call it something you'll remember. I like to add my name so that I can find it easily against all of these other ones. So let's call this Sarah Craft Foam Explore, because I'll also be making custom cut settings for the Joy and Joy Xtra, and press Save. And then in this options menu it gives you, drag the slider all the way up to 350. That means we're going to do as deep a cut as the machine can do. And then in the drop down here where it currently says off, change that. This is how many times it will repeat the cut in the same place to get through the material. If you're doing this for the first time and you haven't tried cutting foam before with your regular blade, don't jump all the way to 9 times. That will be 9 times at the Cricut's strongest cut setting, and you might find that if your foam's maybe not quite as thick as you thought, you might accidentally end up cutting through your cutting mat as well and having a lovely little star or a heart-shaped hole in your mat. Definitely not what we want. So I'm going to play it safe and go for, I reckon, probably just 3 times, and we'll see how it does. If it doesn't cut through this time, we can edit the setting and go up a few more times. But I think 3 is probably going to be okay. And then press Save. Scroll back up to the top of this super long menu and press the X. And then we can press Browse or Materials. Search for my name. And here's my new setting. And press done. I'll change the pressure to more just so it's a little bit stronger, and then I'll get my test piece of foam cutting and we'll see what it does. Right, my blade is in, just my regular Cricut blade. My star wheels are moved over to the side. I've got my craft foam taped to the mat. So let's give it a go on that custom cut setting. Because we set 3 times in the custom cut setting, it's going to do the heart and the star 3 times, one above the other. So it will only cut it once, you'll only see each shape once, but it will do the same lines 3 times so that it goes through a little bit deeper. There's one for the heart, now it's doing the second, and there's the third. Now it's moving on to the star. Once it's finished, don't eject your mat yet. Just have a little look, peel up one of the sides of your foam and see if it's cut through. Now mine hasn't. I can't actually see any indentation of that star shape on the back side of this. So I think I probably needed more passes. Rather than giving up this one and starting again, what you can do is repeat the same cut in the same place, as long as you haven't ejected your mat yet. So my mat is still in the machine. To do that, press the play button again. Even though it's not flashing, you can press it again and it will do the same cut in the same place. So let's give that a go. Let's cut it a second time. Now let's see. It still hasn't cut through. I still can't really see it. So I think probably it's not going to be any more effective if I go a third time. I'm just going to leave it like this and we'll see what we've got. So I'll eject the mat. And don't worry yet that it hasn't cut through. That doesn't mean it hasn't worked. We just need a little bit more effort. Remember, the regular blade in your machine isn't designed to cut materials this thick. So it won't cut through as well as the deep point blade or the knife blade. So it's gone in quite a long way, but not all the way through to the back. But you can sort of see, I'm not sure you can see on camera, but I can kind of see, there you go, the heart and the star almost poking through. So what we can do to see if this has almost worked, enough that we would be able to use it, is, I'm just trying to take this tape off so I don't stick it to my fingers. There we go. Grab a pair of scissors, or you can use a craft knife on a protective board. And I'm just going to go into the star and cut down just one of those lines, sort of starting off the cut. So I'm going to go in, and this foam cuts ever so easily with scissors. And then what you can try is gently and ever so carefully tearing it along the lines of the cut. And now it's coming out. So even though the regular blade isn't quite enough to get through all by itself, it goes through enough that you can still get the shapes out. And I'll do the same for the heart. Just go into it slightly with scissors along one of the lines to start it off. Just a very slight bit in there. And then I can tear it. Be careful on any corners and any points. But there's just such a small amount of it that the blade didn't get through that it will easily pop out. And there we go. Even if you amended your cut setting in Design Space to add more passes, I don't think it would still cut through completely with the normal blade. The deep point blade or the knife blade will be what you want for that. However, this is a really good compromise. The shapes have come out really, really cleanly. I mean, they're not completely smooth, but you could maybe file it down the edges a little bit with an emery board or a nail file, and then you've got your shapes. So if you are wanting to make a project with craft foam without the expense of one of those speciality blades, you can absolutely do it. However, if you do have one of those other blades, they'll be a little bit easier and a little bit more reliable. So let's take a look now at the deep point blade. I'll start the cut again, move these over to where my craft foam is, and press continue, and then wait for it to connect. This time we don't need a custom cut setting. We can go browse all materials, type foam into the search, and use this craft foam setting, and press done. Now this is telling you here that you need the deep point blade, the black blade I showed a little bit earlier. So put that in the machine first before you start cutting, then load the mat, and then follow everything else through. One change I am going to make is I'm going to put the pressure up to more, just to make it go a little bit further through. Let's see what it does. This is just finished cutting with the deep point blade in, and it hasn't actually done a great job. It's kind of torn my craft foam a bit on here, which might be because I put the more pressure on. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But it hasn't actually kind of cut all the way through. It nearly has. Let's give it a look. So this time it's done much better, because if I look at the back, you can see it has almost cut through, but not quite. But a gentle pop out, and those shapes are coming out nicely. So I think if I hadn't have put the more pressure on, that actually probably would have been better. But I've still got the heart there, the star there, and I've got the heart here. And that's also coming out much easier than it did with the regular blade. So there we go. If you've got the deep point blade, it does go through better, but you might find that it kind of bends some of the corners a little bit. To overcome that, try it on the regular pressure, not the more that I put mine to. And if it still does it, then try it on less pressure in that drop down, and then that should help too. All right, so there's my deep point blade. It's done a nice job. It was definitely easier and quicker than the regular blade, because I only needed to go through once, and it only cut each line once as well. Whereas with the regular blade, I remember I did it 3 times, and then that wasn't enough, so I did it another 3 times. It was quite lengthy, whereas this, super quick. But what about if you've got a Maker 3 or a Maker 4 with the knife blade? Let's take a look at that one next, and then we'll compare all 3 options to see which is the best. I've now plugged a Cricut Maker in instead of the Explore 3. We need to change to a Cricut Maker and then start again. Press continue, wait for it to connect. This time we'll go to browse all materials, once again search for foam and choose craft foam. Only this time there's an edit tools button here. By default it will ask you to put in the deep point blade. That's the one I just showed you with the Explore 3, the black blade. But now we're doing the knife blade, so you have to tell it to switch over to the knife blade. Press edit tools, and then you can choose the knife blade in here and press apply. I've learned my lesson this time, and I'm not going to set the pressure to high. I'll keep it as default. I apologise for how dirty my machine is. This is the first Cricut machine I ever got back in 2019, and it's been very, very hard worked over the years. It does kind of need a bit of a clean, but not today. All right, so take out the regular blade. And I love this little ridge in the Maker, so you can leave it there. And then get your knife blade, take off the protective casing, and then you put it in this way so that the flat edge of the casing faces the back of your machine. Close it up. And then load the mat in. And then press the go button. Now my screen in Design Space just flashed up and said that it's going to take a long time to cut. I think that's just a standard message that appears with the knife blade. I can't imagine it'll be that long just to do 2 little shapes, but we shall see. You can see the blade turning, and that's because this is sort of a scalpel blade, like a triangle. So it can't do corners like a regular blade. It has to turn itself before it can go any kind of corner shapes, which means it's great for simple things. For anything really complicated, it can take a long time to do all of its little turns. Okay, that's finished. This is looking good. Let's do a little peeler. And that looks like it's cut through. Excellent. Check the mat. And oh, it's nearly there. Not 100%, but it's close. You can see, I think it's just caught on those corners, but yeah, that's cut through. So there's my heart and the star. This is the back. You see it has cut through. It just needs pushing out. Just a gentle pull, and there we go. When you use the knife point blade, the edges are perfectly straight on all of the sides. There's no puckering or buckling or anything like with the other blades. So if you are cutting craft foam with a maker model of machine, Maker 3 or Maker 4, and you have the knife blade, this is always the blade that I would personally choose to make. It gives you by far the smoothest, neatest cuts. It goes through the first time, goes through the material. You just need to pop it out because it snags a little bit on the corners, but it will go through. It looks lovely. And in my opinion, that is just the best way to cut craft foam. If we compare that to the deep point blade on the Explore 3, the edges aren't quite so smooth. I don't know if it will even show up on the camera, but they're a little bit jaggedy. And if I run my finger along this one, it feels rough, whereas the one with the knife blade feels perfectly smooth. It depends a little bit on what you're using this for. If it's something like a shaker card or to make a mechanism in a turn the wheel card, or something that won't actually be seen on your final project, it's more of a building block, then having the rough edges doesn't really matter. But if you were doing this maybe to decorate a sign to go on a wall or like a crown for a child to wear or something like that, where this will definitely be seen, then the knife blade edges are that little bit neater. There isn't a whole lot of difference between the deep point blade edges and the fine point blade. So this is the blade that came with the machine. Once again, that feels a little bit rough to touch because remember we had to rip the foam along, but the difference between the deep point blade and the fine point blade is fairly minimal. So if you don't have a deep point blade and you just want to cut a few bits of foam for a particular project, in all honesty, I would stick with the blade that comes with your machine rather than buying a new one. If you're not planning on using it for anything else, then it's a whole lot of expense just for a little bit of foam. But if you're going to be cutting lots of foam, or if you're going to be doing other speciality materials, thicker materials, and you have the maker model or any of the other makers, then the knife blade may be worth the investment. It is pretty pricey though, so to be honest, the fine point blade does a great job. So unless, as I said, you're going to be doing loads and loads of it, I would just stick with that. All right, so that's the big machines. Now let's take a look at the Cricut Joy Extra. I'm ready to start cutting with the Cricut Joy Extra. I've selected the correct machine up here, so we'll press Make. And then we need to drag the shapes around so that they'll fit onto the craft foam. Remember, we've moved it in so it starts where the 1 and the 1 meet. You can look at the foam on your mat and compare it to the screen to make sure it's all going to fit. And then press Continue. It'll connect to your machine, which might take a little while. Then press Browse All Materials. As you can see, if you type in foam into the search, nothing comes up. That's because there isn't a dedicated cut setting for craft foam on the Cricut Joy Extra, as it isn't a recommended material for this particular machine. That means you do kind of cut it at your own risk, as it isn't a material Cricut recommends cutting with it. However, I've given it a try and it does work, so that is good. However, just bear in mind that this is a little bit thicker than maybe the machines are meant to cut. All right, so what we're going to need to do is make a custom cut setting for our foam. So on this screen, the All Materials screen, at the very bottom, it's so far down the bottom, it almost disappears off the edge of the screen. It says Material Settings in green down here. I'll click on that. And then this lists out all the materials that the Cricut Joy Xtra has already loaded in. Scroll all the way to the bottom and then press Add New Material. And then call it something that you'll remember. So I'm putting my name on it so I know this will be a custom setting. And I'll put craft foam. And then because I'm doing different settings for different machines, I'll just add extra on the end of there and then click Save. Then find where it's put your new material. Mine is up here. You can see it says my name. And drag this slider so it's as high as the number goes. That means this is going to be the strongest cut setting the machine can possibly do. We need that to be able to get all the way through the material. And then in this drop down here, this shows the amount of times the blade will go over each cut line in your project. So I'm going to try it 5 times to start with. That means it's going to cut the exact same heart and star 5 times. It'll go over the same cut lines 5 times, so it will go through a little bit deeper each time. I have a feeling 5 times might still not be enough to get through the material. However, I do thoroughly recommend testing your machine with 5 times first before going any higher, even if it doesn't cut through. Yes, you might waste a tiny little bit of craft foam, but the danger is if you went for 9 times to start with, for example, and it cut through the foam really easily, you might end up actually cutting through your Cricut mat as well if it's still got several passes to go and it's already gone through the foam. We don't want to risk our mats, so we'll go a little bit safe to start with 5 times, and we can increase it later if we need to. Then press Save. Scroll back to the top and click the X, and then you're back to this screen. Press Browse All Materials again, and this time you can search for your name and it will have your new material. I'll click on that one and done. And then under pressure, change it to more, just to give it that slight extra bit of cutting. And then follow the on-screen instructions to load the mat into your machine. As the Cricut Joy Xtra doesn't have any speciality blades for cutting thicker materials, we're just using the same blade that comes with the machine, so your normal, regular, everyday blade. Before you load your mat into the Cricut Joy Xtra, there are some things we can do to help to protect the craft foam, and that is to move these 4 white star wheels over to the edge. Otherwise, as these roll over the foam, because the foam is squidgy and these are quite ridged, they'll indent your foam and leave track marks in it, and we don't want that. So just move them. They might be a little bit stiff, especially if you've never moved them before, but you can pull them. Oh, that one was really stiff. All the way to the edge. You see that snot over there? Let's try and do one in shot. So I'm just grabbing it with my fingers, pulling it along. Kind of hurts a little bit. You can see what I mean about the ridges. It's marked my finger, and that's what it would do to your craft foam. But the marks will come out of my finger, but they won't come out of the foam. Ooh. So I accidentally just touched the sensor, so it thinks I've loaded the mat. Probably should have done the moving of the star wheels before I sent it to cut in Design Space, because now I'm confusing it. So let's just going over to my computer screen. I'm going to cancel the cut, and that's a bit safer then, so that I'm not making it move. Don't want to trap my fingers in it. I didn't even think about that. Oh, move. That's really, really tight. If you can't get to it, for instance that one, you can just press the blade carrier to move it out of the way. And then let's move this one. God. When you move them in the Explore and the Maker models, it's much easier. But it might just be because I've never moved these ones before. Okay, that was effort. They're now moved over there, and now I'm going to set my computer back up to cut. Right, this is ready to cut again. My light's flashing, so I need to load the mat. So just like you normally would. My mat's a little bit bent on the corner, which isn't ideal. Load it in. That will load the mat. Then press the Go button on your computer. So this is going to cut each of my shapes, and it's going to do it 5 times, because remember we put our custom cut setting at 5 times. So you can see it's doing a heart shape now, and it's going over it again and again. And then it will repeat the same thing with the star underneath. Okay, this is finished cutting. Now, unfortunately, with the Joy Xtra and also the Joy, there isn't a way to get it to cut again if it hasn't quite cut through. So we're just going to need to eject the mat and see if it has, and if it hasn't, then we'll try again with another bit of foam. All right, so let's see, moment of truth, has it cut through? You'll notice that you get a kind of marking on the foam around the edge of all your shapes. That's where the carrier that holds the blade has been pushing up against the craft foam because the craft foam is so thick. Kind of looks quite nice though. It's almost like a little shadowy effect we've got going on. But there's nothing that can be done about that. So let's take this off. And okay, so it hasn't cut through yet on those settings. I can almost see the indentation on the back, so it's almost there, but not quite. You can try and push out the shapes by just kind of getting your nails in and giving it a little push and see if it will go. And I don't think this is going to. You could also try going in with a pair of scissors. Let's do the star, a bit easier. And going along one of the lines. Or you could put this on a craft mat and go over the cut bits with a craft knife to get it to cut through. But what you might find is once you've started it with a pair of scissors, then you can pull the rest of it carefully out because it's so nearly cut through that you can just tear the rest. So you can see now, even though it hadn't cut all the way through the material, I can get the shape out. So with my 5 passes on that strongest cut setting, it's actually done a pretty good job by the time we've got it out. I'm actually really happy with that. Let's see if I can get the heart out doing something similar. So I'll just go and start it off with some scissors and then see if I can tear the rest away. Yeah, that's coming out really well. Okay, so 5 passes didn't quite cut all the way through, but it was pretty close. So I reckon with a bit of modification to our custom cut setting, we can get it going all the way through. Let's give that a try next. To change the cut setting, first I'll just click done on this to go back to the screen and start again. I'll need to use a new bit of craft foam now to test this again, but that's okay. Press continue and wait for it to connect. We'll go to Browse All Materials, and then at the bottom, click the Materials Settings link again, and find your custom setting. Mine was Sarah Craft Foam Extra, and press the Edit link on the right-hand side. And then we'll change this up, and it cut pretty well on 5 times. It didn't go all the way through, but it wasn't far off, so I don't know if it will need all the way up to 9. I'm thinking maybe a 7 would be okay, but I'm going to do 9 just to see what happens. I'd rather do it, and if I damage my mat, that's okay, but I don't want you to damage your mat, so we'll try 9 times, the highest it can go, and see what it does. And click Save, and then close out of here. I've already moved my star wheels, so I don't need to go through all that again. But now we can try again. And this time, it will go over all the lines 9 times instead of 5. This is just finished doing the cut on the new setting, going over it 9 times. Let's see how it's done. Okay. It hasn't cut all the way through my mat, so that's a positive thing. We'll see if it's cut all the way through the foam. It still hasn't. That's interesting. So it doesn't actually seem to have cut any further on that 9 passes as it did with the 5. It feels maybe a little bit further down, but it still hasn't got all the way through. So I'm going to keep it on the 9 passing, I think, when I'm going to use this on my Joy Xtra. We'll try the same trick with our scissors, see if it's done any better. I tape a little bit close to the edge on here, so it's been cut into a little bit. All right, I'll start with the star, cut down one of those lines, and then tear the rest out. This is tearing easier, actually. But not really any noticeable difference between the 5 pass and the 9. So what I would suggest is just giving it a try on your machine, seeing how many passes you think it will need. But I mean, if it does pretty much the same thing on the 5 as the 9, here's my 5 and here's the 9. The lines along the edge are slightly neater. I don't think I'll be able to show you, but on the 5 pass, they're a little bit jaggedy, especially on the bottom half of the foam. Whereas the one I've just cut with the 9 passes, it is smoother on those lines. So perhaps worth doing if you're doing a simple shape like this that doesn't take a long time to cut. But if you're doing something where 9 passes is going to take you, half an hour to cut out, then perhaps the 5 would be okay. So either one of those cut settings, custom cut settings on the Cricut Joy Xtra, perfectly good for us to cut our craft foam. I will just finally check it on the heart. So again, go into it a little bit to start it off and carefully rip. Again, I think this is coming out a little easier than it was on the 5 passes, but not hugely. And there we go. So the answer to can a Cricut Joy Xtra cut craft foam is definitely yes. You'll just need to do a little bit of work to get the right settings for your particular machine. It will depend a little bit on how sharp your blade is, how sticky your mat is, how thick your foam is, things like that. But as we've seen, totally possible to use this material on the Cricut Joy Xtra. Finally, let's see how to cut craft foam with a Cricut Joy. I've got my same heart and star shape, and I've set my machine up here to be the Cricut Joy. Now the Joy isn't designed to cut craft foam, so we're going to need to make a custom setting to do it. Even then, I can't guarantee that it will cut all the way through your foam, but as you'll see from my tests as I show you through this process, it gets very, very close and pretty easy to then finish off the cut either with a craft knife or even just by pushing out the shapes with a little bit of force. Bear in mind, as this is a material the machine isn't made with, you cut it at your own risk. Okay, so just thought I'd get that out there first. I'm going to go ahead and press make, and then I've put my foam on the mat. Just like I was speaking about at the start of the video, I've moved it away from the edge, so I need to move my shapes away from the edge, and you'll see in a moment that I've also taped my bit of foam all the way down. We're doing these shapes first to check our cut settings because it won't use up much of the foam. Alright, press continue. Wait for it to connect, which might take a while. Mine was always slow. There we go. All right, so we need to make a custom cut setting. So go to Browse All Materials, scroll all the way to the bottom, and then it's almost hidden off the bottom of the screen, but click on Material Settings. And again, go down to the bottom and press Add New Material. Give it a name. I'm going to put my name in it so that I know when I'm looking through materials that this is one of mine, and then call it Sarah Craft Foam and press save. Then you can change the settings. Drag the slider all the way to the very end, 350. That means the blade will do as strong a cut as it possibly can. And then the blade will be fine point blade because that's the only blade that we've got with a Cricut Joy. And then in this, where it says off, click into here. This is the amount of times the Cricut will cut each shape before it finishes. I recommend trying it on 5 times and see how it does with your foam. You might find that that cuts through fine, or if you've got foam a bit more like mine, you'll find that it doesn't. If it doesn't, I'll show you how to edit the cut setting in a minute. So for now, I'll put it on 5 times. That means it will cut my heart and my star 5 different times with the blade, and then press save. And then I would close out of this by scrolling to the top and clicking the X. Then go to Browse All Materials, type in foam, or you could search for your name and search, and there's your cut setting. Now, I'm not going to do this quite as it is because I know that I need more than 5 passes. I've already done a lot of testing. So here's how to edit it. If you put that into your Cricut Joy with the 5 passes and it still didn't cut through, then you try it again. Try a different piece of foam, get your heart and your star again, and modify your cut setting so it does each cut more than 5 times. To do that, go back into Browse All Materials, and then material settings. Actually, I didn't need to scroll to the bottom. You can still just about see it. I don't know why it's so close to the bottom of the screen. So material settings, look for your one that you made. So mine is Sarah Craft Foam. Press edit. Keep the pressure at 350, but you can change the amount of times it does the cut. And I'm going for the very maximum, which is 9 times. The reason I suggest to start with 5 is that if you did it at 9 straight away and actually that cut through really easily, then you might end up damaging your Cricut mat if it gets all the way through the material and then has still got a few more passes to go. But at my 5 times, it only went about halfway into the foam, so I'm going straight up to 9. And then click save. That will save your changes. You see it now says 350 and 9 times. So then we can find it again. Here we go, and press done. And then I'm going to change it to more pressure just to try and give it an extra little bit to go through. And then we'll see about loading this into the machine to complete the cut. Here's my Cricut Joy. It's all flashing because it's ready for me to put the mat in. Here's what my mat looks like. I'm using a light grip mat because it's the only type of Cricut Joy mats that I've got. But if you've got a standard grip or a strong grip mat, that would work a little better to hold the foam in place. But I've put masking tape all the way around the edge of my bit of foam to make sure it's not going to move anywhere. If you were watching this earlier with the Explore or Maker models of machine, you'll notice that I moved the star wheels inside before I put the foam in to avoid them marking it. The Joy doesn't have star wheels, so you don't need to worry about that. You can just load your mat in and get it started. So we'll thread that in. It'll load it. You see it passes through under the rollers nicely with that 2mm foam. And then over on my computer, I'll click the go button. Then it's going to start my cut. I'm going to keep this going so you can see what it does. So it's doing my heart now. And now it's doing the heart again. And it's doing the heart again. That's 3, 4, 5. And it's going to keep going all the way to 9. Because remember, I set it to the maximum of 9 passes. Once it's done my heart 9 times, then it's going to do the star 9 times. So let's speed that up and then see how it cuts. That's the cut finished, so I'll eject the mat. And then let's take a look. Now, unfortunately, with the Cricut Joy, you can't send something through more than once. I would have to load the mat again, and it never quite lines up right. So I'd end up with it kind of cut in two very similar but not quite the same places. Now, if I put this up to the camera, you can probably see that the foam has got marked around the edges. It's got almost like a border around that star and the heart. And that's where the carriage, where the blade in, was pushing against the craft foam. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that, but at least it marks it quite neatly in a star and a heart shape. But has it cut through? Well, no, not all the way. Even on that strongest setting, it hasn't quite gone through. But don't worry too much because it's very close. If we look at the back, you see it hasn't gone through, but I can kind of see the outline of the heart and the star, even though it hasn't cut through to the back. So that's a good sign. Grab the tape off. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep sticking it to my fingers. All right, so now there are a couple of things that you can try. You can either just give it a little tug and a little push and see if you can pull it through. So on the heart, you see a little break, a little pull, and I can get it to come out. It was so nearly cut through that I can just tear it, being very careful, tearing it along the lines. And there we go, that's my heart from the craft foam. The edges are fairly neat. Got a little bit of my tape still on there, but that's come out really nicely. For the star, I could probably do the same thing, but because it's more delicate on those points, I'm worried about tearing it. So there are a couple of things you can try. You can get a normal craft mat and put this on and then cut the lines again with a craft knife, something similar to this. Go down them yourself. And if yours hasn't cut out quite as nearly as mine has, that's the best option. However, if it has very nearly cut through like mine, you can kind of see the outline on the back. Then all you need is a pair of scissors. Now for this one, because it's quite easy, it's all straight lines, I could just cut it out following it with scissors. But if yours is a different shape, that could be quite difficult. But what you can do is get your scissors and just cut up to the shape and go down a little bit of one of the lines. I've just cut it in there, and then once you've got to that point, then the rest of it can be torn out fairly easily. It's just doing that first cut into it, which works a little bit better with scissors. Now I'm very carefully tearing it along these lines, slow and steady. And there we go, my teeny tiny heart cut from the craft foam. So it's maybe not quite as straightforward as some of the other machines, but still perfectly doable to cut craft foam on the Cricut Joy. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial on how to cut fun foam, also known as craft foam or funky foam, with your Cricut machine. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for loads more Cricut tutorials and crafting ideas. If you've cut fun foam for a Cricut project recently, let me know in the comments what you made. Or if you're planning on using it but just needed that little bit of extra helping hand, then hopefully now you will be able to cut your fun foam confidently with your Cricut. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!